Hey everyone, grace, peace, and blessings. Thank you for joining me in another video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're returning, thank you as always for all of your support. Please share, like, and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get into our topic, and our topic for discussion is toxic forgiveness. Toxic forgiveness. As a person who's a part of the religious community, I've been in church a while. What we have been taught regarding forgiveness is essentially unconditional forgiveness. And this is basically what Jesus taught. He taught us to forgive our neighbors. He taught us to forgive our enemies. And this is correct. And this is something that we all should do because God has forgiven us. Therefore, we should extend forgiveness to others. But I think our approach in the church on the topic of forgiveness, because we have failed, I believe many, not all, but many people have failed in their teaching of forgiveness within the church to provide people an understanding of how we should forgive and why we should forgive. And because our failure to explain the how and the why behind forgiveness, I believe what this has done, it has opened up the door to abuse. Is open up the door to what I call toxic forgiveness. Now, there's a couple of things we need to understand when it comes to forgiveness. Forgiveness oftentimes does not always come with reconciliation. And I believe in a religious space specifically, for some reason, it has become conflated. Like you can't forgive someone, you have to reconcile in order to forgive someone. And that's not always the case. And I believe that's also been something that's kind of like been pushed in the church. And I don't think that's correct. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean that you should go on in a relationship with that person. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean that a boundary doesn't need to be set. When you are injured, when you are hurt, when you're going through, when someone does something to you, you have to take a step back. See, because forgiveness requires action. You have to take a step back and you have to stop the cycle of abuse. And I'm going to talk about the cycle of abuse a little later on. But just because you have forgiven someone doesn't mean that you have to reconcile with that person. And when we conflate the two, when we join the two, I believe that opens up the door to abuse, and it starts and it promotes toxic forgiveness. Sometimes when people do things to you, you cannot reconcile the relationship. Sometimes when people violate you and they go over your boundaries, it does not mean that you should continue on in a relationship with them. Sometimes you have to sever that relationship. Sometimes you have to put up boundaries and limits with these people in order to protect yourself. So forgiveness does not equate reconciliation. Forgiveness does not mean that you have to become someone's doormat. Forgiveness does not mean that you have to take down all the boundaries and all is well. Because sometimes people, when they do things to you, they're gonna expect for you to forgive them, and they're gonna expect for the relationship to just continue on and for things to go back to normal. And sometimes in some situations that cannot be. So forgiveness can become toxic when we think that in all cases that reconciliation needs to be joined with the forgiveness. You can forgive somebody and not be in a relationship with them. You can forgive somebody and have boundaries set up. You can forgive somebody and never have to speak to them again. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for you. And I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning of this video and getting an understanding of the how and the why. Why would God require us? Because forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness is tough. Why would God require us to forgive our enemies, to forgive people who do all kinds of things to us? It's because this is what forgiveness does. Forgiveness invites healing. We are to forgive because Forgiveness brings forth healing. God wants us to heal from our injury. God wants us to heal from our trauma. God wants us to heal from the injustice that we have suffered. And forgiveness is the thing that will bring forth our healing. That's one of the main reasons. Also because Jesus taught us that, but also it's because we are to be healed. If you want to be healed, you have to forgive. When you walk around with unforgiveness, what happens? You become a bitter person. What happens? You get a callus on your soul. So when we forgive and when we open up the doors to forgiveness, what happens is the bitterness begins to gradually be taken from us, and we begin to heal from those offenses. We begin to heal from those injuries that were that other people did to us, and that we have suffered from. But the whole point of why we should forgive is because we need to get healed. And forgiveness is the way to bring forth healing. But also the thing about forgiveness is that forgiveness cannot take place in a cycle of abuse. I'm going to repeat this one more time. Forgiveness cannot take place in a cycle of abuse. So if you're in a cycle of abuse in a relationship, if you're in a group context, if you're in a cycle of abuse due to systemic abuse, whether it's any type of oppression, whether gender oppression, whether it's racism, you cannot be healed in that environment. Therefore, true forgiveness cannot take place. So there's two tools that's needed in order for forgiveness to come forth. Forgiveness can become toxic if you're in a cycle of abuse and you stay in that abuse and you forgive that person and you try to reconcile to that abuse. It cannot happen because you cannot get healed. The whole point of forgiveness is for you and I to get healed. So you cannot be healed in a cycle of abuse. So you need two tools in order for you to get there. The first tool is love. You need to love yourself. Jesus taught that we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So you can't love anybody else until you love yourself. So forgiveness requires love, and also forgiveness requires justice. We need love and we need justice in order to forgive. I think Nelson Mandela was a great example of this. Nelson Mandela had love, but he also continued to fight for justice. He was in prison for 27 years, fighting against unjust laws and oppression within South Africa. And he did his time, and he suffered in jail. But after he was released, he was able to forgive his jailers. But although he forgave his jailers, Nelson Mandela never stopped fighting for justice. So that's another thing about forgiveness. Forgiveness can become toxic when we don't invite justice into the mix, when we don't invite love into the mix. It can become toxic, right? So what you're doing, if you're in a cycle of abuse, whether it's systemic or whether it's one-on-one in a relationship, and you don't have love and you don't have justice working, you're just setting yourself up for further abuse. You're setting yourself up for basically for destruction. And that is not the will of God. The will of God is for us to heal. So you need love and justice in that. So like Nelson Mandela, if you're dealing with systemic abuse, let's say in the case of racism, we have to continue to fight. You know, I'm a Black woman, and I know that, yes, we are to forgive those who harm us, those people out there who are hateful and who do certain things. But I'm not going to stop fighting for justice. That doesn't mean you stop fighting for justice. That doesn't mean that you put yourself in harm's way. That doesn't mean that you put yourself in a cycle of abuse. See, I have to love myself enough to put myself in a position to stand up against any sort of injustice and to stop the cycle of abuse. So the thing about forgiveness is that Forgiveness does require action. It requires us to love ourselves so we can love our neighbors, so we can forgive our neighbors. And it also requires justice. And justice can also mean, yes, who is going to give us justice for the injustice that was done to us? God is the best dispenser and the best server of justice. So I prefer to leave things in God's hands, but oftentimes we have to stand up for ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves in a position where we become anyone's doormat. It doesn't mean that we have to stop fighting for justice, but we have to have the tools of love and justice in order to forgive in a cycle of abuse, because you cannot be healed in a cycle of abuse. And either you have to destroy the cycle of abuse, or you have to remove yourself from the cycle of abuse so you can be healed. And I don't think that these things are taught enough in the church. We're just told, oh, just forgive your neighbors. Oh, just forgive people and everything will be okay. No, forgiveness takes time. It's not an event. Forgiveness is not an event. It's a process. It could take you months. It could take you years to forgive a person. And it's a process that we have to go through each and every day. But you do need the tools of love and justice that has to be present in forgiveness. You have to love yourself. You have to fight for justice. And also, you cannot conflate forgiveness with reconciliation. Just because you forgave somebody doesn't mean you have to stay in a relationship with them. The whole point is you don't want to, when you forgive yourself, put yourself in harm's way, put yourself in a position to be abused. That is not the will of God. And oftentimes in the church, this is not explained. And people are forgiving. They think they're forgiving, but it's really toxic. They think they're forgiving, but they're really putting themselves in a place where they can be abused and used. That is not the will of God. That is not what God has for us. He wants us to be healed. The whole point of forgiveness is for you and I to be healed. And I want you to be on that path. I'm on that path myself. I have a lot of work to do, and I want you all to continue to do that work. But remember, forgiveness can be toxic if you don't have love, if justice is not present, and if you don't keep in mind that, hey, listen, you have to put up boundaries sometimes. That's what I wanted to share with you. Don't fall into the trap of toxic abuse or toxic forgiveness. Yes, forgive people, but love yourself. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me in another video. I will have more coming out. Take care. God bless. And I will see you in the next video.